I had 3 pennies to my name, 3 cents, an eviction notice, and the bitter taste of hunger. That was my reward for 3 weeks of stitching pearls onto a gown for a woman who decided she just didn't feel like paying. My boss, Desi, she called it business. Nothing personal, but when the December wind cuts through your threadbare coat and your stomach is eating itself from the inside out, it feels pretty damn personal. The gas lamps of Boston flickered, making the cobblestones slick with an oily light. I saw them through the windows of the Union Club, the men of means, warm and safe, sipping brandy while their fortunes grew. I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Every woman in my boarding house knew what came next. When the pennies run out, you find a different way to earn them, a way that costs more than just your time. So I took a deep breath, clutched my mother's silver rosary, and prepared to sell the last thing I had left. A man stepped out of the club, tall and alone, his face hidden in the shadows of his hat. This was it. This was the moment. I stepped out of the alley, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Sir," I whispered, the word catching in my throat. He stopped. He didn't look angry or disgusted. He just looked curious. He had these deep-water eyes that seemed to see right through the patched fabric of my dress, right down to the bone. "Yes?" he said. His voice was calm, level. The words I'd practiced died on my tongue. The lie I was supposed to tell, the act I was supposed to play. It all crumbled under his steady gaze. "I'm looking for work," I managed to say. The lie felt like gravel in my mouth. His eyes scanned the empty, frozen street. He looked back at me, and in that moment, he knew. He knew exactly what kind of work a woman was looking for in this part of town, at this hour of the night. But he didn't sneer. He didn't proposition me. Instead, a look of profound sadness crossed his face. "What sort of work?" he asked, his voice softer now. I lifted my chin. If I was going to do this, I wouldn't hide. "Whatever you're willing to pay for." He held my gaze for a long moment. Then his eyes dropped to my hands, my ruined, calloused, ink-stained hands, the hands of a seamstress. "You sew," he said. It wasn't a question. I blinked, thrown completely off balance. How did you know?" "Your fingers," he said, stepping a little closer. "The way you hold yourself, straight-backed, like you spend your days bent over a table. And—" he reached out, his fingers gently brushing my hair. "You have a thread. Silk, by the looks of it. Expensive." I reached up and found it, a shimmering strand of midnight blue. A ghost of the gown that had cost me everything. Then he asked a question that shattered my composure. "Are you hungry?" My stomach answered for me, a loud, humiliating growl in the quiet street. "When did you last eat?" he pressed, his voice gentle but firm. "Yesterday," I lied. Then the shame of it all came crashing down. "No, the day before." He reached into his coat, but he didn't pull out a proposition. He pulled out a thick roll of bills. He peeled several off and held them out to me. "There's a cafe 2 blocks down, Murphy's. This will get you a hot meal and a clean room for the night." I stared at the money. It was more than I'd seen in a year. I don't understand. What do you want in return?" A shadow flickered in his eyes. "Nothing. Sometimes a meal is just a meal." But I couldn't take it. In my world, nothing was free. Kindness was a currency, and the interest was always brutal. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because I don't know what it costs," I whispered. He looked at me with an intensity that pinned me to the spot. "You assume there must be a cost," he said. "There's always a cost, but it's not always the one you expect." He paused, then handed me a small, stiff card along with the money. "My name is Y. Trotman. Your name is Valley." Again, not a question. It was a statement. How could he possibly know my name? I hadn't told him. I hadn't told anyone. My heart started to pound for a whole new reason. This wasn't a random encounter. This was something else entirely. "I've been watching you, Miss Valley," he said, his voice dropping low. "For weeks. I saw what happened at Desi Culpepper's. I know about the gown. I know about the eviction." The world tilted on its axis. This stranger, this wealthy man from the Union Club, knew the intimate, humiliating details of my failure. He hadn't just stumbled upon me, he had sought me out. The kindness wasn't random charity, it was a calculated move. But why? "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm a man who needs an artist," he said. "The woman who designed that pearl-encrusted gown was not a simple seamstress. She was an artist. But she was cheated, and now she is desperate. Desperate people can be persuaded." His words hung in the cold air, chilling me more than the wind. This wasn't about saving me. It was about using me. "Here's my proposition," he continued, ignoring my shock. "You take this money. You eat. You sleep in a warm bed, and tomorrow morning you come to the address on that card. You will work for me, exclusively." The card was heavy, embossed with gold leaf. Trotman Enterprises, Cattle and Land Development, Beacon Hill. "What kind of work?" I asked, my mind racing. "I own textile mills," he explained. "Good ones. But my fabric is seen as functional, strong, for work clothes and ship sails. I need to change that. I need to show the world it can be made into art. But I am in a quiet war, Miss Valley, a war against my own family." This was getting stranger by the second. "My sister, Eleanor, runs the family's West Coast operations from San Francisco," he said, his voice tight with resentment. "Our father's will left us each half of the empire, with a condition. Within 1 year, whoever demonstrates the most artistic and commercial innovation gains controlling interest of the entire company. The final judgment will be made by a neutral arbiter, the most respected eye in the industry." He was offering me a job, not as a seamstress, but as a soldier in his family war. "My sister has the finest European-trained designers on her payroll. I have mills and a theory." He looked directly at me. "I believe true art doesn't come from a classroom. It comes from hunger, from necessity. It comes from someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Someone like you." The offer was insane. The compensation he named was a fortune, more money than my parents had earned in their entire lives. A private house, unlimited materials, and a salary that could change my life forever. But it came with a catch. A dark one. "There's a condition," Y said, his deep water eyes locking onto mine. "You will tell no one about this arrangement. You will be my secret weapon. Your designs will be presented anonymously. If you win, you will be rewarded beyond your wildest dreams. If you lose—" He let the word hang in the air. "If you lose, my sister will crush my operations. You will be out on the street again, and this time, no one will be there to help you. My sister will make sure of it." It wasn't a job offer. It was a gamble. He was betting his empire on me, a starving, unknown seamstress he'd found on the street, and I was betting my life. "What if I take your money and run?" I asked, testing him. A faint smile touched his lips. "You won't," he said with unnerving confidence. "An artist needs a canvas. I'm offering you the world." He turned and walked away into the darkness, leaving me with a fistful of cash, a cryptic warning, and a calling card that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I went to Murphy's. I ate the stew and the warm bread. I slept in the clean, quiet room. But I didn't rest. All night, my mind churned. A secret war, a rival sister, an anonymous competition for a fortune. Was Y. Trotman my savior, or was he something far more dangerous? The next morning, I walked to Beacon Hill. The townhouse was a fortress of brick and ivy, a monument to old money and quiet power. A severe-looking housekeeper led me to a study where Y. Trotman stood waiting by a fireplace. He was different in the daylight. Less of a phantom, more of a man, but no less intense. "I'm pleased you came," he said, as if there had never been any doubt. He didn't waste time. He laid out the battlefield. His sister, Eleanor, was a force of nature, ruthless, brilliant, with an army of designers who followed the latest Paris fashions to the letter. She saw fabric as a commodity. Y saw it as potential. "She creates copies," he said, pacing the room. "Beautiful, perfect copies of what already exists. You, Miss Valley, you will create what no one has ever seen before." He led me from the townhouse to a carriage, and we rode to another part of the city, to a narrow, elegant house on Commonwealth Avenue. "This will be yours," he said simply. It was like a dream. A parlor with velvet chairs, a kitchen with a modern stove, a bedroom with a soft bed and clean sheets. It was more than a house. It was a sanctuary. But the third floor took my breath away. It was a workshop, not just a room, but a cathedral dedicated to craft. Massive cutting tables, dress forms of every size, cabinets filled with every kind of needle and pin, and walls. The walls were lined with bolts of fabric in every color and texture imaginable. Silks, velvets, tulles, cashmeres. It was a library of dreams. "This is your armory," Y said from the doorway. "Your first task is to create one gown, a single piece to announce our presence. It will be shown to a private audience of buyers and critics in 1 month's time. It has to be a masterpiece." For the first week, I was paralyzed. The sheer possibility of it all was overwhelming. The fabrics were so beautiful, so expensive, I was terrified to make the first cut. Y left me alone, sensing I needed to find my own way. The breakthrough came late one night. I was looking out the window at the sky, a smear of city haze blocking all but the brightest stars. It made me think of my father back in our small village in Spain. He wasn't a learned man, but he knew the stars. He'd taught me the constellations, telling me they were stories written in the sky, connecting everyone, everywhere. That was it. That would be my story. I worked like a woman possessed. For 3 weeks, I barely slept. I chose a silk the color of a moonless night. I layered it with tulle so fine it looked like captured smoke. The design was deceptively simple, but the real art was in the details. On the bodice, using thousands of tiny shimmering beads, I began to stitch the night sky. I recreated the constellations from my childhood: Cassiopeia, Orion, the Big Dipper. It was more than decoration. It was a map of my memory, a story of who I was. Y came to see it a few days before it was finished. He walked in without a word and stood before the dress form. He leaned in close, his eyes tracing the intricate beadwork. "These are real star formations," he said softly, his voice filled with awe. He pointed. "That's Orion." "My father taught me," I whispered. He straightened up, but he didn't look at the gown. He looked at me. "So it's not just a dress, it has a meaning." "Everything should have a meaning," I replied, my voice stronger now. "When someone buys a gown like this, they should get more than just fabric and thread. They should get a piece of a story." He stared at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. "You are more than I bargained for, Miss Valley." I didn't know then if that was a compliment or a warning. The night of the private showing, the house was filled with the most important people in Boston's fashion world. Buyers from New York, critics from the big papers. They were skeptical, whispering behind their gloved hands. They knew Y. Trotman as a cattle baron, a man of industry. What did he know of couture? And then, the model walked out, wearing the constellation gown. A hush fell over the room. The midnight silk flowed around her, the layers of tulle making it seem as if she were floating. The beaded constellations caught the gaslight, twinkling like a captured galaxy. It was more than a dress, it was magic. The questions came in a flurry. Who was the designer? Where did they train? Paris? Milan? Y just smiled. The designer is a local artist who prefers to remain anonymous. But one woman wasn't satisfied. She was tall, severe, with eyes that could chip granite. Her name was Lonafe Crutchfield, the publisher of the most influential fashion gazette in the country. She was the one critic whose opinion could make or break a career. She circled the model slowly, her eyes missing nothing. "This is not the work of a local artist," she declared, her voice booming through the silent room. "This level of vision, of execution, this is genius. I must meet the designer." Y looked at me from across the room, a silent question in his eyes. This was the moment. The first shot in his war had been fired, but as I stepped forward, I felt a cold knot of dread in my stomach. Lonafe Crutchfield's gaze was too sharp, her praise too absolute, and I realized she wasn't just a critic. She was the judge, the neutral arbiter Y had told me about. This wasn't just a showing. This was the first round of the competition, and I had just walked onto the battlefield without even knowing it. Lonafe Crutchfield's eyes narrowed as I approached. She took in my simple dress, my calloused hands. Disbelief warred with fascination on her face. "You?" she said, the word hanging in the air like an indictment. "You made this?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the thunder in my chest. "Impossible," she stated flatly. "Where did you train?" "I learned from necessity," I replied, echoing the words I'd spoken to Y. Lonafe exchanged a look with Y, a flicker of understanding that I couldn't decipher. It was a look between equals, between people who understood the rules of a game I was just beginning to comprehend. She turned back to me, her scrutiny so intense it felt like a physical weight. "The work speaks for itself," she finally conceded, though her tone was still laced with suspicion. She addressed the room. "Trotman Enterprises has officially entered the world of high fashion. Your move, San Francisco." The room erupted in a buzz of conversation. Orders were placed. Deals were discussed. I was no longer an invisible seamstress. I was a mystery, a ghost designer whose work had just sent a shockwave through the industry. But as the guests departed, Lonafe pulled Y aside. I was close enough to hear their hushed, urgent conversation. "This is a dangerous game you're playing, Y," she warned. "Eleanor will not take this lightly. You've shown your hand." "It was a calculated risk," Y countered. "You've put this girl in the crosshairs," Lonafe shot back, her eyes flicking towards me. "Eleanor doesn't play fair. She will not try to beat the design. She will try to break the designer." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. In the weeks that followed, Starlight Couture, the name Y had chosen for our secret venture, became the talk of the town. We were flooded with commissions. The workshop, once my solitary sanctuary, now bustled with activity. I hired a small team of seamstresses, women I chose not for their pedigrees, but for their passion. Women who, like me, had been overlooked and underestimated. Y and I settled into a rhythm. Our days were a whirlwind of fabric sourcing, design meetings, and production schedules. Our evenings were spent in his study, poring over strategy, planning our next move against his sister. He treated me as a partner, an equal. He listened to my ideas, respected my instincts, and somewhere in those late-night conversations, surrounded by sketches and swatches of silk, something began to shift between us. The line between business partners began to blur. I saw the man behind the cattle baron, a lonely man burdened by legacy, fighting a silent war against his own blood. He saw, I think, the woman behind the needle, someone who understood the language of creation, of making something beautiful out of almost nothing. The first attack from Eleanor was subtle. A major shipment of French lace we'd been waiting for was mysteriously lost at sea. Then, a fabric dyer we relied on for our signature colors suddenly broke his contract, refusing to work with us for any price. "This is her doing," Y said, his jaw tight as he read the telegram. She's cutting off our supply lines. We adapted. I learned to create my own dyes from natural materials. I found a local lace maker, an elderly woman whose work was even more intricate than the French imports. Each obstacle Eleanor threw at us, we turned into an opportunity to innovate. Our designs became even more unique, more sought after. We were winning. And that's when Eleanor sent in her real weapon. Her name was Cordelia Harbison. She was the daughter of Noble Harbison, one of Boston's oldest and wealthiest patriarchs, a longtime friend of the Trotman family. She arrived at the house one afternoon unannounced, a vision of blonde, blue-eyed perfection. "Why, darling," she exclaimed, breezing past the housekeeper and kissing him on both cheeks. "I heard you were dabbling in the textile arts, and I simply had to see for myself." Her eyes landed on me, and a perfectly manicured eyebrow arched in polite condescension. "And you must be the prodigy." Y introduced us, his voice carefully neutral. "Vali is the creative force behind Starlight Couture. Cordelia's family are old friends." Cordelia was charming, witty, and knew everyone in Boston society. She positioned herself as an invaluable ally. "You have the talent, my dear," she said to me, her tone dripping with false sincerity. "But you lack the connections. You need a guide, someone to introduce you to the right people, to teach you which forks to use. Let me help you." Y was wary, but Cordelia was relentless. She made herself indispensable, arranging fittings with the city's most influential women, whispering our name at the most exclusive parties. She praised my designs effusively, calling them revolutionary. She became my friend, or so I thought. The commission came from one of the Astors in New York. It was to be the centerpiece of our spring collection, a wedding gown. The budget was astronomical. The pressure was immense. This was the dress that would solidify our reputation. I designed a gown of liquid silk charmeuse, so delicate it was like weaving moonlight. The train was to be embroidered with hundreds of seed pearls, forming a complex, cascading pattern. It was the most ambitious project I had ever undertaken. Cordelia was a constant presence in the workshop, watching me work, offering suggestions, always with a bright smile. One afternoon, I was working on the bodice. Cordelia was there, ostensibly helping me sort pearls. We were talking, laughing. She made a sudden gesture, as if startled by a fly, and her arm knocked over a bottle of ink that was on a nearby table. Black ink bled across the pristine white silk of the nearly completed bodice. A perfect, beautiful, irreplaceable piece of fabric. Ruined. Oh, my goodness! Cordelia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with what looked like horror. "Vali, I am so sorry. How clumsy of me." It was an accident, a terrible, unfortunate accident. But as I looked at the black stain spreading like a disease across my masterpiece, I saw a flicker of something in Cordelia's eyes. It was there for just a second, so fast I almost missed it. It wasn't horror. It wasn't regret. It was triumph. And I knew. This was no accident. This was an attack. Lona Fay Crutchfield's warning echoed in my mind. She will not try to beat the design. She will try to break the designer. The war was no longer about lace and dye. It had just been brought into my workshop, and I was the target. I said nothing. I cleaned up the mess. I told Cordelia it was fine, that these things happen, that I could fix it. She left, showering me with apologies that now sounded hollow and false. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that triumphant glint in her eye was burned into my mind. An accident? No. It was too precise. The ink bottle wasn't even close to the edge of the table. She had deliberately knocked it over. But why? To ruin the Astor gown, of course. To make us miss our deadline. To damage our reputation. It was Eleanor's work, carried out by her society spy. I had to prove it. For the next few days, I was a ghost in my own house. I was pleasant to Cordelia. accepting her endless apologies. I told why I had a plan to salvage the dress, working on it behind a locked door. But my real work began after everyone else was asleep. I started watching Cordelia. I searched her room. It was a long shot, but I was desperate. Tucked away in a small, elegant writing desk beneath a stack of scented stationery, I found it. A telegram receipt. It was dated 2 days before the accident. It was a money transfer. A large sum sent from an account in San Francisco. The recipient was a name I knew all too well. Desi Culpepper. My whole body went cold. I sat on the floor of Cordelia's room, the flimsy piece of paper trembling in my hand. It all crashed into place. The puzzle pieces, stained with ink and betrayal, formed a sickening picture. Eleanor hadn't just hired Cordelia to sabotage me now. She had been working against me from the very beginning. My firing, the trumped-up complaint about the pearl gown, Desi deducting my wages, leaving me with nothing, the eviction. It wasn't just bad luck. It wasn't just a cruel boss. It was a calculated, deliberate plot. Eleanor had paid Desi to push me into the street. She wanted me broken, desperate, ruined. She must have known why was watching me, and she tried to destroy me before he could even make his offer. She had underestimated my will to survive, and she had underestimated why, and Cordelia. She wasn't just a saboteur. She was a key player in a conspiracy that had been in motion for months. Her friendship was a lie, her help a poison. I felt a surge of ice-cold rage. They hadn't just tried to ruin my work. They had tried to ruin my life. They had played with my desperation like it was a game. I took the telegram receipt. I went back to my workshop, my mind clear and sharp for the first time in days. They thought they could break me. They thought I was just a poor little seamstress who would crumble under pressure. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I took the ruined bodice of the Astor gown. The ugly black stain was a mark of their treachery. I stared at it, not with despair, but with purpose. They wanted to leave a scar on my work. Fine. I would turn their scar into a weapon. I found Y in his study, the telegram receipt in my hand. I laid it on the desk in front of him without a word. He read it, his face darkening with every line. He looked up at me, his eyes blazing with a fury that mirrored my own. Desi Culpepper, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. She set you up from the start. At Eleanor's instruction, I added, my voice tight, and Cordelia was the go-between. The ink wasn't an accident, it was a message. He stood up and walked to the window, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I knew Eleanor was ruthless. I never imagined she would stoop to this, to manipulate someone's life, their survival. He turned back to me, his face etched with guilt. I brought you into this valley. I put you in her path. This is my fault. No, I said, stepping closer to him. This is not your fault. This is their choice. But what we do next, that is our choice. I'll ruin them, he growled. I'll expose them. I'll use this telegram to— No, I interrupted. A piece of paper can be explained away. A rich woman's word against a poor seamstress's. They will twist it, deny it. We can't fight them in their world, with their rules. We have to fight them in our world, with our weapons. He looked at me, confused. What are you talking about? The Astor gown, I said, a plan forming in my mind, sharp and clear as crystal. The final showing for the competition is in 2 weeks. Lona Faye Crutchfield will be there. Eleanor and Cordelia will be there, expecting to see us fail. They're expecting us to withdraw the gown, to admit defeat. But the bodice is ruined, Y said. No, I corrected him. It's been transformed. I led him up to the workshop and unlocked the door. I showed him what I had been working on for the past 2 nights. I had taken the stained bodice, but instead of trying to hide the ink, I had embraced it. Using fine silver thread, I had embroidered over the black stain, tracing its edges, turning the random, ugly splotch into a deliberate, beautiful pattern. It now looked like a black rose, blooming from the heart of the gown, its petals edged in shimmering silver. It was dramatic, unexpected, and more beautiful than my original design. I'm going to do the same with the rest of the collection, I explained, my voice filled with a newfound fire. Every gown will tell a story of sabotage and survival. We won't tell anyone what they did, we will show them. Y stared at the bodice, then back at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a smile of pure admiration. They tried to break the artist, he said softly, but all they did was give her a better story to tell. His anger had subsided, replaced by a fierce pride. He reached out and took my hand, his thumb gently stroking my ink-stained fingers. You and I, Valley, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We are partners, in this and in everything. In that moment, standing in the lamplight of the workshop, surrounded by the tools of my trade, the war with Eleanor faded into the background. All that mattered was the man standing in front of me, the look in his eyes, and the feeling of his hand holding mine. The line that had been blurring between us for months finally disappeared. "What are you saying?" I whispered, though my heart already knew the answer. "I'm saying that this stopped being about business a long time ago," he said, his deep water eyes searching my face. "I'm saying I've fallen in love with you." The confession hung in the air, more stunning than any gown I could ever create, and the most shocking part was the truth that came rushing up from my own heart in response. "I love you too," I heard myself say. "I think I have from the very beginning." He closed the distance between us and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of recognition, a quiet confirmation of something that had been true all along. We were two lonely people from different worlds who had found their home in each other. But our story wasn't over. We still had a war to win. The day of the final showing was cold and gray, but the ballroom of the hotel was ablaze with light and anticipation. The entire fashion world was there. And in the front row, seated next to Lona Faye Crutchfield, were Eleanor Trotman and Cordelia Harbison. Eleanor was the polished, colder version of her brother. She had the same dark hair, but her eyes were chips of ice. Cordelia sat beside her, looking smug, occasionally whispering behind her fan. They looked like queens at an execution, waiting for the axe to fall. Backstage, my small team of seamstresses moved with quiet efficiency. The gowns were lined up, each one a chapter in our secret story. One gown had a delicate pattern that, on closer inspection, was made to look like shattered glass, painstakingly embroidered in silver thread. Another had a whole section of lace that appeared to be torn, only to be mended with threads of pure gold, making the damage the most beautiful part of the dress. They were gowns of resilience. The Astor wedding gown was the finale. I was to model it myself. As I stood in the wings, Y came and stood beside me. He didn't say anything. He just squeezed my hand. It was all the encouragement I needed. The show began. One by one, my designs came out. I could see the confusion, then the dawning understanding on Lona Faye Crutchfield's face. She leaned forward, her expert eye catching the subtle narrative I had woven into the seams. I saw her glance at Eleanor, whose own smile was beginning to look strained. Finally, it was my turn. I walked out onto the runway. A collective gasp went through the audience. The gown was a triumph. The liquid silk flowed around me, and at its heart, the black and silver rose pulsed with a dark, defiant beauty. It wasn't a symbol of ruin. It was a medal of honor. I walked the length of the runway, my eyes locked on Eleanor. Her face was a mask of disbelief, her knuckles white where she gripped the arm of her chair. Cordelia looked pale, her triumphant smirk completely gone, replaced by the sickly green of fear. They understood. They knew they were looking at their own treachery, transformed into art and thrown back in their faces. I stopped directly in front of Lona Faye Crutchfield. An unusual design choice for a wedding gown, Miss Valley, Lona Faye said, her voice carrying across the silent room. A black rose. It's beautiful, but tragic. What is the story it's telling? This was the moment. I could expose them, tell everyone about the ink, the telegram, the conspiracy. But I just smiled. It tells the story of transformation, I said, my voice clear and strong. It says that sometimes the things that are meant to scar us can become our greatest strength. It's a symbol of a love that is not afraid of the darkness, but finds beauty in it. My eyes flicked from Eleanor to Y, and in that moment, the competition was over. I hadn't just won, I had redefined the terms of victory. Lona Faye Crutchfield stood up. In my career, she announced to the room, I have seen craftsmanship, I have seen artistry, I have seen commerce, but rarely have I seen all three combined with such intelligence and heart. The terms of the Trotman Endowment were to award control to the party who demonstrated the most artistic and commercial innovation. Today, we have seen true innovation. Innovation not just of fabric, but of spirit. She looked directly at Eleanor, her expression unyielding. San Francisco showed us beautiful clothes. Boston has shown us the future of American fashion. She turned to Y. The board will be informed. You have won. The room exploded into applause. Eleanor and Cordelia slipped out in the ensuing chaos, their defeat silent and absolute. Y came onto the stage. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't congratulate his partner. In front of the entire Boston elite, in front of the flashing cameras of the newspaper photographers, Y. Trotman, the cattle baron, dropped to one knee. He took my hand, the seamstress's hand, and he held it up for all to see. Valley, he said, his voice ringing with emotion, you are my partner, my inspiration, and the woman I love. Marry me. The applause was deafening. Looking down at this incredible man, I realized we hadn't just won a company. We had built a kingdom. Yes, I whispered, yes. Our wedding was on the front page of every newspaper. Cattle baron weds his starlight seamstress. The scandal and the success made our brand a national phenomenon. Starlight Couture wasn't just a label. It was a story of an underdog, a testament to the idea that talent and grit were more powerful than privilege. We built an empire together. But it was an empire with a soul. We opened the Starlight Academy, a school that trained young women from poor backgrounds, giving them the skills and the chances I never had. We paid them a fair wage. We gave them a share of the profits. We weren't just making dresses. We were making a difference. 5 years later, I stood at the window of my office, watching the first graduating class of the academy throw their caps in the air. My daughter was chasing butterflies in the garden below, and Y was holding our infant son on the porch. A letter was on my desk. It was from Harper's Bazaar. They wanted to put me on the cover. Not my designs, me. They wanted to tell my story, the whole story, the 3 pennies, the street corner, the desperation, everything. Are you sure? Y had asked me the night before. Once it's out there forever. I looked out at the young women in the garden, their faces bright with hope. I thought of the countless other women out there, trapped in back rooms, being told their work wasn't good enough, being paid just enough to starve. My past wasn't a source of shame. It was a source of strength. It was the ink stain that I had embroidered with silver. The magazine hit the stands in December. The cover photo was of me, wearing the Astor wedding gown. The headline was simple: The Seamstress Who Redefined Success. Letters poured in from all over the country. But one letter, written on pale blue stationery, stopped me in my tracks. It had a New York postmark. I have spent 5 years believing my brother made a terrible mistake, it began. Reading your story, I see now he didn't choose you despite where you came from. He chose you because of the strength it gave you. You have not just built a company. You have built a better world. For that, you have my deepest respect. Sincerely, Eleanor Trotman. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a surrender, a recognition that the things she had tried to use against me, my poverty, my desperation, my history, were the very things that had allowed me to win. The real victory wasn't inheriting an empire. It was building a new one, stitched together with courage and thread, one that would give thousands of other women the chance to write their own stories. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, because we have a story of unbelievable revenge coming tomorrow that you will not want to miss.